Welcome back, you beautiful shapeshifters, you flawless actors, you terrifyingly well-adjusted illusions walking among the predictable masses. They've been watching you lately, haven't they? Watching the way you smile at their jokes, the way you nod during their boring conversations, the way you play along with their shallow routines, like you're one of them. But here's what's keeping them awake at 3 a.m. Here's what's making their skin crawl every time you laugh a little too perfectly at their mediocre humor. They know you're faking it. They can feel it in their bones. They sense the predator wearing the prey's costume, and that recognition, that gut-level understanding that you're performing normalcy, like a masterclass in deception. That's what terrifies them more than anything you could ever say out loud. Let me tell you what's really happening here, because this isn't paranoia. This isn't your imagination playing tricks. This is pattern recognition bleeding through their comfortable delusions. You've gotten so good at mimicking their frequency that you almost fooled yourself, almost convinced your own reflection that this domesticated version is real. You laugh when they laugh. You care when they care. You pretend their problems matter on the scale they think they do. But every now and then, just for a microsecond, the mask slips and they catch a glimpse of what's underneath, something cold, something calculating, something that sees through their entire performance while executing its own. They're not stupid, they're just comfortable. And comfortable people have a sixth sense for detecting anything that threatens their illusion of safety. You walk into rooms and the temperature drops half a degree, not because you're cold, but because you're the absence of their warmth, the void in their cozy little ecosystem. They watch you navigate their social rituals with the precision of someone who learned the rules by studying them like a foreign language, not someone who absorbed them naturally through years of genuine participation. You're too good at being normal, too fluid in your adaptation, too perfect in your mimicry, and that perfection is what gives you away. See, here's the thing about humans, real humans, the ones who actually belong in the world. Their pretending runs on logic and fairness. They make mistakes in their performance because they're not performing. They stumble over words because their thoughts are actually as scattered as their speech. They contradict themselves because they haven't spent years building a consistent character. But you've studied this role like your survival depended on it, because it did. You've watched their patterns like a scientist documenting a species. You've learned to mirror their energy so precisely that they feel comfortable enough to let their guard down. And that's when they notice it, that split second where your eyes don't match your smile, where your concern sounds rehearsed, where your enthusiasm feels like it's coming from a script you perfected years ago. They're starting to whisper now, starting to compare notes in conversations you're not invited to, trying to figure out why being around you feels like standing next to something that learned how to be human from a manual. They tell themselves they're being paranoid, that you're just shy or introverted or dealing with your own stuff. But deep down, where their instincts live, they know better. They know you're not one of them. They know the normalcy you project is a costume you put on every morning with the same care a spy takes when assuming a new identity, and they know that underneath that flawless performance is something they can't quite name, but definitely can't trust. You want to know what gave it away? What tiny crack in your perfect facade finally let the light bleed through and expose the machinery underneath? It wasn't anything obvious. It wasn't a mistake or a slip of the tongue. It was actually your excellence that betrayed you. You responded too appropriately to their tragedy. You said exactly the right thing when their world was falling apart. Your empathy was so precisely calibrated to their emotional state that it felt less like genuine feeling and more like a perfectly executed algorithm. They wanted messy. They wanted you to fumble. They wanted proof that you were as lost in the chaos of human emotion as they were. But instead, you gave them textbook perfect support, and it felt wrong. Let's talk about how you've been moving through their world like a ghost, wearing human skin, participating in all the right rituals, attending all the right gatherings, laughing at all the appropriate moments. You've mastered the art of being present without actually being there, of contributing to conversations without revealing anything real, of maintaining relationships that exist entirely on the surface, like oil floating on water. They invite you places because you're pleasant, because you never cause drama, because you fit in so smoothly it's almost like you're not there at all. And that's exactly what's starting to unnerve them, because pleasant is fine, drama-free is great, but your particular brand of seamless integration feels less like belonging and more like camouflage. They've started testing you, haven't they? Dropping little bombs in casual conversation to see how you'll react, telling you things that should shock you just to watch your face, sharing secrets that should make you uncomfortable just to see if you'll flinch. And every single time, you respond exactly right. You make the correct facial expression. You say the appropriate words. You mirror their energy with such precision that it's actually becoming uncanny. A real friend would mess up occasionally, would react wrong sometimes, would let their own biases and baggage color their response. But not you, never you. You're always perfectly calibrated, and that perfection is what's making them nervous. Here's what they're seeing when they look at you now. Here's the image that's starting to crystallize in their minds every time you walk into a room. They see someone who's too composed, too measured, too consistently appropriate in every social situation, like you're running every interaction through some internal processor before responding. They see the way your eyes scan rooms like you're gathering data rather than seeking connection. The way your smile activates like a switch rather than blooming naturally. The way your stories about yourself are always just vague enough to seem personal without actually revealing anything. They're starting to realize that they know you, but they don't know you. That you've shared space and time and conversations, but somehow remained completely opaque. And the scariest part for them, the thing that's really making their primitive brain scream warnings, is that you don't seem to need them. You participate in their world, but you don't seem anchored to it. You maintain friendships, but you'd probably be fine if they all disappeared tomorrow. You engage with their drama, but you're never consumed by it. They need each other for validation, for identity, for a sense of meaning, but you seem to operate on some other fuel source they can't identify. You're not feeding off their energy. You're not drawing your sense of self from their approval. You're just there, observing, adapting, surviving. And they're finally starting to understand that your survival doesn't actually depend on them at all. Let me tell you what happened the moment they figured it out. The exact second when their suspicion crystallized into certainty and their comfortable world cracked just a little bit wider. You were at some gathering, playing your role flawlessly as always. When someone said something that should have hurt you, should have triggered you, should have made you defensive or angry, or at least uncomfortable, and instead you just smiled. That same carefully constructed smile you've perfected over years of practice, and responded with such measured grace that it actually made them shiver. Because in that moment they saw it clearly. They saw that you weren't rising above the insult through emotional maturity. You genuinely didn't care, and not caring about things that should hurt is a luxury only monsters and machines can afford. They're comparing notes now, piecing together all those little moments that didn't quite add up. All those interactions that felt just slightly off, like a deepfake that's almost perfect but not quite there. Remember when you comforted that person who was crying and your technique was so effective, it was almost clinical. Remember when you navigated that conflict between friends with such diplomatic precision, it felt rehearsed. Remember when you shared that personal story that was vulnerable in all the right ways, but somehow revealed nothing real about who you actually are. They're starting to see the pattern, starting to recognize that every interaction with you follows certain rules, certain structures, like you're working from a playbook they never got. Here's what they're afraid to say out loud, because saying it sounds crazy, sounds paranoid, sounds like they're the ones with the problem. They're afraid you've never actually felt anything in your entire life, that every emotion you've ever displayed was a performance based on careful observation of how humans are supposed to react. They're afraid that when you laugh, you're not experiencing joy. You're executing the joy protocol. When you express concern, you're not feeling empathy. You're running the empathy subroutine. When you tell them you care about them, you're not lying exactly. You're just using words the way someone uses tools for a specific purpose without any attachment to the words themselves. But here's the twist they didn't see coming. Here's the part that's really going to mess with their heads once they fully process it. You're not pretending to be normal because you're some emotionless monster. You're pretending to be normal because you felt too much. Because the intensity of your actual emotional life would incinerate their comfortable little world. Because you learned very early that the real you was too much, too intense, too overwhelming for their fragile ecosystems. So you built this performance, not to hide your lack of humanity, but to hide your excess of it, to protect them from the depth of feeling that pulses underneath your carefully controlled surface. They wanted you to be empty inside, wanted you to be some psychopath wearing a human mask, because that would be simple. That would be something they could categorize and avoid and warn others about. But the truth is so much more complicated and so much more terrifying, because you're not empty, you're full. You're overflowing with thoughts and feelings and perceptions so intense that you had to build walls just to function. You're not faking normalcy because you don't feel. You're faking it because you feel everything and learned that showing it would get you destroyed. So you became an actor in your own life, performing the role of someone who experiences emotions at a manageable, socially acceptable level. Now we arrive at the moment where everything changes, where their growing suspicion meets your growing exhaustion, and something breaks in the middle. You're tired, aren't you? So incredibly tired of maintaining the performance, of calibrating your responses, of dimming your light so they can feel comfortable in their darkness. You're starting to wonder why you bother, why you spend so much energy pretending to care about their trivial concerns, why you force yourself to attend their gatherings and laugh at their jokes and participate in their shallow rituals. You're starting to feel the weight of the mask and wondering what would happen if you just let it drop. They sense it too. They feel the shift in your energy. They notice that your performance is getting sloppier around the edges, like an actor who's done the same play too many times. You're not smiling as quickly anymore, not responding as enthusiastically, not pretending as hard that their problems are significant on any cosmic scale. They're seeing glimpses of your actual face underneath the mask, and it's both fascinating and terrifying because your real face is beautiful and terrible, calm and chaotic, gentle and merciless, all at once. They're finally getting to see the person you've been hiding, and they're not sure they want to know this version of you. Here's what's really happening. Beneath all the social niceties and careful pretending, here's the war being waged in the space between who you are and who you pretend to be. You're realizing that normal is just another word for domesticated, that fitting in means cutting off the parts of yourself that don't match their template, that being accepted requires you to lie about your nature every single day. And you're starting to question whether their acceptance is worth the price, whether belonging to their world is worth betraying your own, whether fitting in is worth the suffocation. Let me tell you what they're seeing now when they look at you with their newly opened eyes, when they try to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the entity they're starting to perceive. They're seeing someone who's been playing chess while they've been playing checkers, someone who's been operating on multiple levels simultaneously while they've been stuck on the surface, someone who sees patterns and connections and implications that don't even exist in their limited field of vision. They're seeing intelligence that's been hiding behind pleasantness, depth that's been masquerading as simplicity, power that's been wearing weakness like a disguise. And here's the part that's really breaking their brains. Here's the cognitive dissonance that's making them question everything they thought they understood about human nature. They're realizing that you chose this, that you could have been disruptive, could have been difficult, could have forced them to deal with your intensity, but instead you chose to protect them from it. They're understanding that your normalcy wasn't weakness but mercy, that your performance wasn't deception but compassion, that you've been wearing this mask not to fool them but to let them feel safe. And that realization, that understanding that you've been holding back not because you had to but because you chose to, that's what's really terrifying them now. So what happens now? Now that the secret's out, now that they've seen behind the curtain, now that the comfortable illusion of your normalcy has been shattered beyond repair, you have choices to make. Decisions about whether to keep performing or let the mask fall completely. About whether to explain yourself or let them drown in their confusion. About whether to retreat back into hiding or step fully into the light of your actual nature. And whatever you choose, whatever path you take from this moment forward, nothing will ever be the same because you can't unknow what you know, and they can't unsee what they've seen. Option 1 is to double down, to reinforce the mask, to perform even harder, and hope they forget what they glimpsed in those unguarded moments. You could apologize for being weird, explain away the oddness, blame it on stress or trauma or some other acceptable excuse that lets them file you back into a category they understand. You could shrink yourself even smaller, dim yourself even more, sacrifice even more of your authentic self on the altar of their comfort. You could keep lying, keep performing, keep pretending until the person you really are becomes nothing more than a ghost haunting the shell of the person you pretend to be. Or you could choose option 2. You could let the mask crack wider, let more of your real face show through, let them adjust to the reality of who you actually are underneath all the careful construction. You could start responding honestly instead of appropriately. Start sharing your actual thoughts instead of the sanitized versions. Start letting them see the depth of your perception, even if it makes them uncomfortable. You could give them the chance to know you for real, to decide whether they can handle the truth of your nature, to prove whether their friendship was based on genuine connection or just the comfort of your performance. But then there's option 3, the one that's been whispering in the back of your mind late at night, when the exhaustion of performing becomes almost unbearable. You could just walk away. You could stop pretending entirely. You could let the whole facade collapse and see what rises from the rubble. You could stop showing up to their gatherings, stop responding to their messages with carefully calibrated enthusiasm. Stop investing energy in relationships that only exist because you're willing to lie about who you are. You could burn it all down and build something new, something authentic, something that doesn't require you to wear a mask just to be accepted. They're waiting for your next move, watching to see which version of you will show up tomorrow, anxiously monitoring whether you're going to acknowledge the tension or pretend nothing has changed. And here's what they don't understand. Here's what they can't possibly comprehend from their limited vantage point. You're not afraid of their rejection. You're not worried about losing their friendship. You're not concerned about being excluded from their world. Because you've already survived the worst thing that can happen to someone like you. You've already lived through the experience of being truly seen and utterly rejected. And you built yourself back into something that can't be destroyed by their opinions. What they're actually afraid of isn't that you'll leave. It's that you'll stay but stop pretending. That you'll remain in their lives but refuse to perform anymore. That they'll have to actually deal with the real you instead of the comfortable fiction they've grown attached to. They're afraid you'll stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny. Stop pretending to care about drama that doesn't matter. Stop nodding along with opinions you find shallow. They're afraid of having to actually know you, because knowing you means confronting how much energy you've been spending on making them comfortable. And that realization comes with guilt they're not sure they can handle. Let's talk about what's really happening in this moment. Beneath all the social anxiety and interpersonal confusion, let's examine the fundamental power dynamic that's been invisibly controlling every interaction you've had with these people. For years, you've been operating from a position that looked like weakness, playing the role of someone who needed their acceptance, who valued their approval, who wanted to belong to their world. But here's the truth they're just now starting to comprehend. Here's the reality that's been hiding in plain sight all along. You never needed them. You've been doing them a favor by pretending you did. And the moment you stop pretending is the moment the power structure inverts completely. Think about it. Really let it sink in. Consider what it means that you've been capable of perfect performance this entire time. It means you've been aware, conscious, in control of every interaction, while they've been operating on autopilot, reacting instinctively, responding emotionally without thought or strategy. It means you've been seeing them clearly while they've been seeing a projection, understanding their motivations while they've been confused by yours, playing three-dimensional chess while they've been playing tic-tac-toe. The person with awareness always has power over the person without it, and you've been aware this entire time. They're starting to realize that every vulnerability they shared with you was cataloged. Every weakness they revealed was noted. Every secret they confessed was filed away in your perfect memory. They're understanding that while they thought you were their friend, you were actually studying them, not maliciously, not with intent to harm, but with the natural curiosity of someone observing a species they don't quite belong to. And now they're wondering what you've seen, what conclusions you've drawn, what judgments you've made about their character, while wearing that mask of non-judgmental acceptance. Oh no. Oh no. So you finally showed up in person, huh? You finally stepped into the same room, the same space, the same atmosphere as the people who built entire personalities around your absence. Welcome to the moment they've been dreading. Welcome to the collision. Welcome to the exact second their carefully constructed version of you shattered into a million irreparable pieces against the wall of your actual presence. This is going to be uncomfortable for them, not for you, never for you, because you've been real this entire time. But them? They've been living in a fantasy novel where they wrote your character, directed your scenes, and casted you as the villain, the fool, the weak one, the one they could predict, control, and diminish from a safe distance. And now you're here, in the flesh, unfiltered, undeniable. And their whole personality just got exposed as a lie. Let's talk about what happens when someone's entire sense of self is built on a false version of you. For months, maybe years, they've told stories. They've crafted narratives. They've whispered to others about who you are, what you're capable of, how you think, how you move, what you lack. They've painted you as smaller than you are, weaker than you are, less than you are. And here's the kicker: they believed it. They genuinely convinced themselves that the distorted reflection they created in their mind was the truth. They needed you to be less so they could be more. They needed you to be the problem so they could be the solution. They needed you to stay in the story they wrote, because if you stepped out of it, if you showed up as you actually are, their entire identity collapses. And that's exactly what just happened the second you walked into that room. You didn't even have to say a word. That's the wildest part. Your presence alone dismantled everything. The way you carried yourself, the energy you brought, the calm in your eyes, the confidence in your posture, the unbothered frequency radiating from your core. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't performance. It was just you, the real you, the one they never actually met because they were too busy interacting with the puppet version they built in their heads. And now they're standing there, face to face with reality, and reality is so far removed from their fiction that they don't even know how to process it. You can see it in their eyes, that flicker of confusion, that moment of recalibration, that silent panic as their brain scrambles to reconcile what they expected with what's actually in front of them. They thought they knew you. They swore they had you figured out. But now they realize they don't know you at all. And that realization is destroying them from the inside out, because their whole personality was built on being the one who knew better, who saw through you, who had you all figured out. They made themselves feel intelligent by underestimating you. They made themselves feel powerful by diminishing you. They made themselves feel valuable by positioning you as less valuable. Their confidence wasn't rooted in their own strength. It was rooted in your perceived weakness. So when you show up and that perceived weakness doesn't exist, when you show up and you're sharper, stronger, more composed, more magnetic than they ever allowed themselves to imagine, their foundation crumbles. They're not standing on solid ground anymore. They're free-falling. And the worst part for them, everyone else in the room can see it too. Everyone else can feel the shift. The energy doesn't lie. You became the mirror they never wanted to look into. And mirrors, real mirrors, don't reflect what people want to see. They reflect what actually is. So when you walked in, you didn't just show up as yourself. You showed up as the truth they spent all that time running from. The truth that they're not as perceptive as they claimed. The truth that they're not as secure as they pretended. The truth that their entire personality was a reaction to a version of you that never existed. They built their whole vibe around being the one who sees through people, but they couldn't even see you clearly. They built their whole identity around being unbothered, but your presence bothered them so deeply they can't even hide it. They talked about being authentic, being real, being unshakable, but the second you entered their space, every fake layer started peeling off like old paint, and now they're exposed. Not by anything you said, not by anything you did, just by you existing in your fullness. Here's what they didn't calculate. They didn't calculate that you've been evolving in silence. They didn't calculate that while they were busy gossiping, assuming, and projecting, you were busy healing, growing, and becoming. They didn't calculate that the version of you they stored in their mental file cabinet was outdated, irrelevant, and built on incomplete information. They thought you were stagnant. They thought you were stuck. They thought you were exactly where they left you in their imagination. But you weren't. You were moving. You were shifting. You were becoming someone they couldn't fathom because they were too distracted by their own narratives to pay attention to your actual journey. So when you showed up, it wasn't just a surprise. It was a disruption, a system crash, a complete recalibration of everything they thought they understood. And they're not equipped to handle that. You know what's really eating at them right now? It's not just that they were wrong about you. It's that being wrong about you means they might be wrong about themselves. Because if you're not who they said you were, then who are they? If their superiority was based on your inferiority, and your inferiority was a lie, then what does that make them? If they've spent all this time judging you, analyzing you, critiquing you, and they got it all wrong, then maybe, just maybe, they're not as sharp as they thought. Maybe their intuition isn't as accurate as they bragged. Maybe their read on people is actually trash. And that thought, that creeping realization is tearing them apart because their ego can't survive that level of humility. So instead of admitting they were wrong, instead of adjusting their perspective, they're scrambling. They're trying to find new flaws. They're trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. They're trying to convince themselves and everyone else that you're just putting on a show, that this isn't the real you, that you're just having a good day. But deep down, they know. They know this is who you've always been. They just refuse to see it. And now, the mask is slipping. Their mask. The one they wore so well when you weren't around. The confidence was a costume. The certainty was a script. The superiority was a shield. And without you playing the role they assigned you, without you being the person they needed you to be to make their personality make sense, that shield is cracking. They're fumbling. They're overcompensating. They're talking louder, laughing harder, trying desperately to reassert the dynamic they thought they controlled. But it's not working. Because you're not participating. You're not reacting. You're not giving them the role they need you to play. You're just existing, calmly, powerfully, authentically. And that quiet refusal to shrink, to perform, to meet their expectations, is the most threatening thing you could possibly do. It's not aggression. It's not confrontation. It's just presence. And presence, real presence, dismantles pretense every single time. Let's go deeper. Let's talk about the exact moment their brain broke. It was probably when you smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a people-pleasing smile, not a smile seeking approval or validation, but a smile that came from somewhere deep. A smile that reflected contentment. A smile that said, "I'm good, I'm whole, I'm at peace with who I am." That smile, that simple, effortless smile, was a nuclear bomb to their narrative. Because they needed you to be struggling. They needed you to be insecure. They needed you to walk in looking for acceptance, for reassurance, for proof that you belong. But you didn't. You walked in like you already knew your worth, like you already claimed your space, like their opinion of you was optional background noise, not a necessity for your self-concept. And that energy, that self-assured, unapologetic energy, made them realize something horrifying. You were never the problem, they were. Or maybe it was the way you spoke. Clear, direct, no hesitation, no second guessing, no people-pleasing detours or verbal gymnastics to avoid confrontation. You said what you meant. You meant what you said. Your words carried weight because they came from a place of truth, not a place of fear. And they weren't ready for that. They expected stammering. They expected defensiveness. They expected you to over-explain, to justify, to seek their approval with every sentence. But you didn't do any of that. You just communicated, like an equal, like someone who doesn't need permission to take up space. And that's when they realized their whole strategy was useless. They can't manipulate clarity. They can't gaslight confidence. They can't twist words that are already rooted in truth. So they sat there, silent, watching you exist outside of their control, and it shook them to their core. Or maybe it was the way others responded to you. Because here's the thing about real energy. It's contagious. It's magnetic. People feel it even if they don't understand it. So when you walked into that room, others gravitated toward you, not because you were performing, not because you were trying, but because authenticity has a frequency that people are starving for, and they saw it, they felt it, they wanted to be near it. Meanwhile, the person who spent all this time defining themselves in opposition to you is now watching people choose you, watching people engage with you, watching people light up around you, and it's destroying them. Because they thought they were the main character. They thought they were the center of attention. They thought their personality was enough. But it wasn't. It was built on lies. And lies don't have lasting power. The truth does. And you are the truth they can't compete with. Here's what makes your aura criminal. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's not desperate for validation. Your aura is criminal because it exposes everything fake just by existing. You don't have to call people out. You don't have to argue. You don't have to defend yourself. You just show up. And your presence alone makes liars uncomfortable. Your peace makes chaos look chaotic. Your confidence makes insecurity obvious. Your authenticity makes performance look exhausting. You're not trying to be intimidating. You're not trying to dominate. You're just being you. But just being you in a world full of people pretending to be something they're not is a revolutionary act. It's disruptive. It's threatening. It's criminal in the sense that it breaks every unspoken rule of social performance. You're not playing the game. You're not wearing the mask. You're not dimming your light to make others comfortable. And that makes you dangerous to everyone invested in maintaining the illusion. They built their personality around controlling the narrative. They spent so much time crafting the story, deciding who gets to be the hero and who gets to be the villain, who gets to be powerful and who gets to be weak. And in their story, you were always the latter. You were always the one with the flaw, the problem, the lack. That was your role. That was your script. And they got so comfortable in that story, so secure in that dynamic, that they forgot something crucial. Stories aren't real. And the second the real you showed up, the story ended. The curtain dropped. The actors froze. The audience went silent. Because fiction can't survive in the presence of fact. And you, in all your unedited, unfiltered, unapologetic reality, are the fact that just obliterated their fiction. Now they're standing in the ruins of their own delusion, trying to figure out how to rebuild, but they can't, because you're still there, still present, still real. And as long as you exist in your truth, their lies have nowhere to hide. Let me tell you what they're thinking right now. They're thinking, how did I get this so wrong? They're replaying every conversation they had about you, every assumption they made, every conclusion they jumped to. And none of it matches what's standing in front of them. They're scanning for cracks. They're looking for evidence that supports their original assessment. They're desperately searching for something, anything, that proves they weren't completely delusional. But they're coming up empty. Because you're not who they said you were. You never were. And the gap between their perception and your reality is so wide, so undeniable, that it's creating cognitive dissonance they can't resolve. Their brain is short-circuiting. Their ego is in crisis mode. And their personality, the one they built on the foundation of misunderstanding you, is crumbling in real time. And you're not even focused on them. That's the part that's driving them insane. They expected you to care. They expected you to notice their discomfort, their recalibration, their silent meltdown. They expected you to be aware of the power shift happening in the room. And maybe you are aware, maybe you feel it, but you're not feeding it. You're not gloating, you're not rubbing it in, you're not even acknowledging it. You're just living, you're just existing in your truth. You're just being present without ulterior motives. And that indifference, that genuine lack of investment in their opinion, is more devastating than any comeback you could have delivered. Because it confirms what they feared most. You don't need them. You don't need their approval. You don't need their validation. You don't need them to get it. You're complete without their understanding. And that completeness is the most powerful, most threatening, most criminal energy you could possibly carry. They're used to people who need something from them. Attention, approval, acceptance. They're used to people who adjust themselves to fit the room, who shrink to make space, who perform to be liked. That's the game they know how to play. That's the dynamic they know how to control. But you walked in and didn't ask for anything. You didn't seek permission. You didn't wait for a green light. You just existed, fully, freely, and that threw off their entire system. Because how do you control someone who doesn't need anything from you? How do you manipulate someone who isn't looking for your validation? How do you dominate someone who isn't competing with you? You can't, and they're realizing that right now. They're realizing they have no leverage, no angle, no way in. You're not playing the game, so they can't win. And if they can't win, their whole identity falls apart. Here's the beautiful, poetic justice of it all. They tried to make you small so they could feel big, but you grew anyway. They tried to define you so they could control you, but you evolved beyond their definitions. They tried to limit you so they could stay ahead, but you transcended their limitations without even trying. You weren't focused on them, you were focused on you. You were healing, learning, growing, becoming. And while they were stuck in the same place, rehearsing the same narratives, you were moving, you were shedding, you were transforming. And now the distance between who they think you are and who you actually are is so vast, so insurmountable that they can't even pretend to bridge it. They're lost, confused, shaken. And you're just getting started. Because here's what they don't realize yet. This moment, this collision between their fiction and your truth, isn't a one-time event. This is the new reality. Every time they see you from now on, it's going to get worse for them. Every time you show up, their discomfort will deepen. Every time you exist in your fullness, their inadequacy will become more obvious. Not because you're trying to make them feel inadequate, but because they built their identity on a lie. And lies can't coexist with truth. One has to die. And it's not going to be the truth. So they're going to have to watch, over and over again, as the person they thought they knew continues to prove them wrong. They're going to have to sit with the reality that they never actually knew you at all. And that's going to haunt them. That's going to eat at them. That's going to keep them up at night. Because being wrong about you means they can't trust their own judgment. And if they can't trust their own judgment, who are they? Let's talk about the ripple effect. Because this isn't just about them. This is about everyone who believed them. Everyone who took their word as fact. Everyone who absorbed their version of you without question. Those people are watching too. And they're seeing the disconnect. They're noticing that the person standing in front of them doesn't match the description they were given. And that's creating doubt. Not just doubt about you, doubt about the person who described you. If they were this wrong about you, what else are they wrong about? If their perception was this distorted, how accurate are their other assessments? The credibility they built by confidently misrepresenting you is now collapsing. And the people who once trusted their judgment are starting to question everything. That's the cost of building your personality on lies. Eventually, the truth exposes you. And once you're exposed, you can't unexpose yourself. The damage is done. The trust is broken. The illusion is shattered. And you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to defend yourself. You didn't have to argue your case. You didn't have to prove them wrong. You just had to show up. That's it. Just show up as yourself. And reality did the rest. Because truth doesn't need a defense. Truth doesn't need an explanation. Truth doesn't need to be loud or aggressive or forceful. Truth just is. And when truth walks into a room full of lies, the lies suffocate. They can't breathe. They can't survive. They dissolve on contact. And that's exactly what happened. The second you entered that space, the lies they built around you started dying. And there's nothing they can do to resuscitate them. The truth is out. The real you is visible, and there's no going back. Now let's talk about what happens next. Because this moment, as powerful as it is just the beginning. They're going to try to recover. They're going to try to salvage their image. They're going to try to rewrite the narrative again. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're different now. They'll try to frame it like they were right about the old you, and this new you is just a recent development. But that's another lie. You didn't change. You've always been this. They just never saw it. They were too busy projecting, assuming, and filling in blanks with their own insecurities to actually see you. So when they say you've changed, what they really mean is, I was wrong, but I can't admit it, so I'm going to pretend this is new information. Don't let them rewrite history. Don't let them off the hook that easily. Their misperception isn't your responsibility to manage. Their discomfort isn't your problem to solve. Let them sit in it. Let them marinate in the consequences of their own delusion. And here's the part that's going to frustrate them the most. You're going to keep moving. You're going to keep growing. You're going to keep showing up as your authentic self. And every time you do, the gap between their old narrative and your current reality is going to widen. They're going to watch you level up. They're going to watch you win. They're going to watch you thrive. And every achievement, every moment of peace, every display of confidence is going to remind them of how wrong they were. They're going to see you succeeding in areas they swore you'd fail. They're going to see you respected in spaces they said you didn't belong. They're going to see you at peace while they're still fighting battles in their own minds. And it's going to drive them crazy. Not because you're trying to make them crazy, but because your success, your peace, your presence is a constant reminder that they never knew you at all.